Hi, here's May, and this video is the second one where I talk about drawing all the Genshin Impact characters. This video will just be about the process I used for drawing each one of them. And as an example, I recorded myself drawing Xiao with full screen recording, and usually I only record time lapses since my tablet isn't very good at handling screen recordings, and I often have to restart my tablet when I'm screen recording because my pen disconnects. But just for this one illustration I recorded the full screen though, so you can see how I use layers and what kind of brushes I use and so on. I'll talk about all the steps I use to finish illustrations, so hopefully you can get an idea of how I drew all the Genshin Impact characters. And now let's start. At first I start out with a very basic sketch, and you will see throughout this time-lapse I have some parts where I sped it up just 2 times and then I sped it up a lot, so you could sometimes see in more detail what I'm doing with the layers and so on, and sometimes it's then just the rest of the process of that phase. But yeah, we started with the sketching phase. I usually also make folders for each phase. I use a very thick brush to make the thumbnail of the pose kind of, and I also reference some of the other illustrations I made just to get the proportions right, which was very helpful throughout drawing all the different characters to have them all matched in the proportions. And since Xiao's face was facing forward, you will see that I struggled a lot with the face symmetry, since I didn't just want to use the mirror tool, but then I also didn't want the face to be completely from the front, just almost from the front. You will also see that I use a lot of folders and layers to separate different body parts and so on, especially with the line art later and the colors. But in sketching phase even I also do this, and I like to use different colors to separate different outfit parts. For sketching I often use multiple strokes. I know that this kind of chicken scratching is what you could call it, is not that good for line quality and line confidence, but when I'm doing line art, it's where I then use these long strokes. And what I'm working on constantly is me not having to press the undo button too often, but I'm still struggling with this. Sometimes when I'm sketching I also like to use the transform tool to later on adjust the different parts of the outfit. And often with the outfits itself it wasn't too difficult to sketch them, since I used this site called Games Fashion Archive for references, where I could see the characters' 3D models and move them around and so on. Also, I find just getting the outfit to look right much easier than the face, since you often don't pay that much attention to the outfit if every single part is completely correct in a perspective, but with the face you just see it more clearly when something is wrong. I also made a second pass for the face and the hair for the sketching. This is something I only do sometimes, depending on how rough my first sketch is. But later on what I also sometimes did was do a very, very rough thumbnail of the pose and then do the sketch above. And for the sketch I like to sketch out the whole body and then put the outfit on top. The same goes for the head. I like to sketch out the whole head and put the hair on top. But after the sketching phase is done, we then move on to the line art phase. You see I use a brush that has some varying line thickness depending on the pressure you put on it. I make it pretty thin. Over time I increased the size of it to around 13 pixels in default, but for Xiao's illustration I went with around 10, as you can see. But I decided I would want the lines to be a bit thicker for the illustrations over time. And you can see that I struggled a lot with the face and pressed the undo button quite a lot, also with the hair. And I also use the transform tool a lot when working on the line art. You can see that for the lines, my folder and layer structure, you see I use a lot of layers. You don't have to do this, but that's just the way I like to work. I have separate folders for the face, the eyes, the hair, the body. Then for the outfit, depending how many different parts there are, I'll have 1 to 3 folders, and also for the accessoires. Since I use this folder structure pretty much for each one of the stickers, I just had the folder saved in one of the Krita files where the whole structure was already in there with empty layers, and I just copied this into all the other documents whenever I needed it. The same goes for the coloring folder later on. And you see what I struggle with the most with all the illustrations pretty much were the eyes, and especially the iris, having them be shaped in a nice way. I've also seen that many artists don't even draw outlines for the iris, and in the future I maybe want to try doing more of this myself and not just using line art like this, because for me it's just difficult to determine which kind of shape I would want the iris to be in. Should it be more a wide circle or a long circle, or should it even be like a circle? You see that for the pupils I like to not just do a circle. Instead I kind of indicate this small reflection on the pupil, even though I later on also add regular reflections. It's just something I really like to do. I started doing this when drawing traditionally, since that led to me not having to draw in the reflections for the eyes to look kind of alive, since this already indicates that there's this reflection on the pupil. For his necklace, since there are so many pearls, I just duplicated them and transformed them, putting them into the right place. For parts like this where it's just a circle, I don't like to use just a circle tool most of the time. I like to try to draw a symmetrical circle myself, and if I need it multiple times I'll transform it. I don't want to draw too many circles, since when you're drawing them yourself then it will be easy to see that some of them might be longer or something like that. And if you just duplicate it and all of them look similar, as long as they look kind of like a circle, it probably will fit together. And now we move on to the flat colors. And when I'm doing this, I like to start out by also having the background be darker and oftentimes also colored. I pretty much use the same background color, which is darker than this blue tone, but also a blue tone for the later illustrations. But here I still use this blue tone, and it kind of also helped with having colors fit together. But what helped the most with having all the colors of all the illustrations fit together was, for one, I had this color palette you see me use, where I have a bunch of colors saved, and sometimes I of course also pick the colors myself if it was too different from one of the colors there. And then also in the end, you won't see me do this in this process, but I applied a filter to all the stickers, which also helped with making them all look similar coloring wise. And how I do like to do the flat colors is I either just do the magic wand selection and fill in the colors if the lines are closed correctly, which is not always the case. And before I even start filling in the flat colors, I duplicate my line art so that it just is thicker overall, and this just makes it easier for Krita to recognize the lines if they're closed or not. Then if the lines are not closed and I want to use the magic wand tool, I first draw in some outlines where the flat colors should be and then fill it in later on. That's how I go about doing the flat colors. I always make sure that overall the colors look good together. And now we move on to the shading stage. For this, using the folders is very helpful. You see for the folder structure, I just had this structure also with the skin, the hair, then for the eyes, the white parts, the color parts, and then for the outfit, different folders. The folders with the flat colors is very helpful. I make a layer on top of them with a layer set to multiply. And then I use the lasso selection tool to select the different areas where I want there to be shadow. And I use the airbrush to paint the shadows in. So it's kind of a mix of cell shading, but then also some more soft blended shading. For the skin, I find that this is where a lot of artists' process of shading is very different. For me, for this series, how I was shading the skin was under the neck. I had the strongest skin shadow to really separate the face from the body and kind of put more emphasis on it. On the face, I made one side have this kind of shadow. I learned about doing a shadow like this from Ensemble Stars, and I don't always use it now, but for these stickers I always use this kind of shadow on the face, except for the chibi characters. And then I also do a highlight on the nose. The hair is also something that I find very fascinating with lots of different art styles. For me, I just do some basic cell shading, but then I also add these painterly strokes. I first used this when I was drawing some Genshin Mermaid illustrations, and I discovered that I really liked how it turned out, but I'm not sure if I want to keep on using this method of doing the hair. But for these stickers. That's what I did. And for the eyes, as I said before, I'm not that happy with how my eyes in general look, but what I do is I use a combination of multiply and overlay layer for the shadows in general. How I pick the colors for them is that I use the basic flat color and then I make the color a bit darker and I shift the hue mostly towards the blue tone. So let's say on the color wheel, if there's a yellow color, I would go into the orange hue for the shadows, or for pink, I would go into the purple hue for shadows and so on. But sometimes I also switch this up. It often is dependent on the overall illustration, how it looks. But in general, I like to make the shadows a bit darker and saturated, shifting the hue a bit. For the eyes, for the overlay, I then like to go in the opposite direction with the hue and use a lighter color. It gives the eye colors this nice contrast. You see me selecting the shadow areas and using the airbrush a lot, but sometimes I also just use an eraser on the shadows to have there be a more soft transition. For his accessoires, for anything that's gold or silver, like in here, I also like to apply some highlights using overlay or screen layer modes. And I experimented with this with, for example, his gloves on the hand and so on as well. Especially with gold, shading it for me is different than other outfit parts since it often has a lot more different reflections and so on. So it can be some more variations of the shadows. What I was struggling with all the illustrations a bit as well were the nose, because you see here that I just use 2 lines for the nose, but sometimes I also use 3 lines. Oftentimes when I do this, I'm not sure which version I like more. For older characters, I like to just go with 3 lines. So for the tall female and male characters, for example Kaya or Diluc, Beidou and so on, I would use 3 lines. But then for the younger ones, I wasn't always sure which kind of noses to do. And now we enter the final stage, which was coloring the lines. The approach I used here is an approach I also used for all the other illustrations, but I refined it a bit more towards the end. I first put the lines and the colors together in one folder, and then I select all transparent pixels, and then I invert the selection, and I also feather it by 1 pixel. After this, I then fill in the layer with 1 color, and for this I like to go for the color that is most present on the character, just so I don't have to use too much coloring on this layer myself later on. But when I have this layer, what I'd like to do now is do a folder with it and put layers on top with the different colors I want the lines to have. So for example, I would do 1 layer for the skin and 1 layer for the black parts of his outfit, 1 layer for maybe the gold parts for his outfit and so on. And in this process, you see that I often paint the colors myself on top of this layer, on top of 1 layer, but over time what I was doing was selecting the parts of the character that had 1 color and then just filling it in. And for the color itself, I used to color the different parts of the lines. And what I like to do here is select the color of the outfit part. For example, let's say for the white part of his outfit, I would select the white color I used. Then I would, similar to the shadow color, pick a color that's a bit darker and shift the hue a bit. Then I put this color on all the lines where the white parts of the outfit are. And then for the parts that form the outline of the character, meaning they are not on the inside of the whole drawing, if you know what I mean, I then go over these parts with an even darker color, to overall make the silhouette stand out a bit more. And in the end, I then merge this whole colored layer and put it as a clipping mask on top of the line art. And then the lines are colored in this way. And also what I like to do at last is then duplicate my whole line art layer. I put the upper one on the multiply layer mode and I lower its opacity to around 50%. And for the lower one, I blur it by around 2 pixels and just leave it at the normal blending mode. That's how I achieve this line art look I want for these illustrations. And that's it for the overall process I used for all these sticker illustrations. I hope you could get a good idea of how I drew all of these and how I like to structure my process, also the layers and so on with all the folders. I use a lot of them, as you can see. The overall time drawing this took was around 4.5 hours. If you have any questions regarding my process, you can also leave them in the comments. And if you want to see some of the things I did in more detail, what you can do is also slow down the video, but just maybe mute the audio then. I hope this video was helpful to watch, and drawing all the characters was challenging, but it was also a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about, for example, character design. I hope you enjoyed watching the video and have a great day. Goodbye!